A fighter turned down $3 million to step into the ring with the most feared man in his division. And the moment he said no, a 22-year-old champion you might not know yet said yes and walked into the biggest night of his life. Here's what almost nobody tells you about boxing. The fight you watch on Saturday night was not decided by who wanted to fight whom. It was decided months earlier, in offices and courtrooms by money, contracts, and a lawsuit. The punches are the last 5% of the story. This is the story of how Xander Zayas versus Jaron Ennis came to exist, and it begins with a $3 million offer that one man looked at and threw straight in the trash. Because in boxing, the most important decisions are never made with fists, they're made with signatures, and the story of this Saturday's main event is really the story of 3 signatures that never happened and one that finally did. Start with the problem at the center of all of this, Jaron Ennis. 34 fights, 34 wins, 30 of them by knockout, an 88% knockout rate. For years, Ennis sat at the very top of ESPN's welterweight rankings, the #1 fighter in his weight class, and arguably the most avoided man in the entire sport. So skilled, so dangerous, that other champions quietly found reasons not to share a ring with him. He became the IBF welterweight champion in the wake of Terence Crawford's move up, defended it, and then unified the division by stopping Amanda Stanionis. He had cleaned out welterweight so completely that there was almost no one left to beat. Eventually, Ennis did what avoided fighters always have to do. He went looking for bigger game. He gave up his welterweight belts, walking away from titles most fighters spend a lifetime chasing, and moved up to 154 pounds, junior middleweight. He announced himself instantly, knocking out Uisma Lima in the very first round to claim an interim world title. Then he turned to the camera and called out the one-man fans actually wanted to see him fight, Vergil Ortiz Jr., another undefeated, heavy-handed knockout artist. It was the fight to make. Ennis, who turns 29 the day before this card, was a man in his absolute prime with nothing left to prove one weight class below. On paper, it was perfect. 2 undefeated punchers, both in their primes, both with knockout power, the kind of fight boxing is supposed to make and so often doesn't. The promoter Eddie Hearn said the deal had been negotiated. Ennis had even signed for the Ortiz fight as part of his contract extension with Matchroom. The fight the whole sport wanted was supposedly done. But supposedly done and actually happening are 2 very different things in this business, because before a glove was ever thrown, the money had to be agreed, and boxing makes that harder than any other sport on earth. There's no league setting salaries, no draft, no schedule handed down from above. Every single fight is its own private business deal. The purse negotiated, the network date secured, the sanctioning bodies paid, the percentages fought over line by line. There's even a federal law, the Muhammad Ali Boxing Reform Act, that forces a promoter to disclose to a fighter exactly what the promoter is making off his bout. It is less a sport than a marketplace, and in a marketplace, deals collapse. This one was about 2. Here is the number at the heart of this entire story. To make the Ennis fight, Vergil Ortiz's side was offered a guarantee of $3 million, plus a share of the pay-per-view revenue on top. $3 million, guaranteed, before a single ticket was sold. And in a sport with no salary, no contract you can count on year to year, that kind of locked-in money is rare and precious. Most fighters grind an entire career and never see a single guaranteed purse that size. And Ortiz's team said no. His manager, Rick Meridian, rejected the offer. He didn't want $3 million plus a percentage. He wanted a flat $7 million with no pay-per-view thresholds attached, no conditions, no if the numbers hit, just $7 million, locked. Now, to a normal person, turning down $3 million guaranteed dollars sounds insane, but this is the logic of boxing economics. A percentage of pay-per-view is a bet. It only pays if enough people buy. A flat guarantee is certainty. Ortiz's camp was betting on themselves to be worth more than $3 million and refusing to carry the risk of a pay-per-view that might underperform. They wanted the certainty, the other side wouldn't give it. This is the oldest tension in the sport. A promoter wants to tie a fighter's pay to how many people actually buy, so the risk is shared. A fighter at his peak wants his money locked, win or lose, sold or not, and when a fighter decides he's a bigger draw than the offer in front of him, he walks away from the table. Ortiz walked. And so the fight that the entire sport wanted, the fight that was negotiated, signed, done, quietly died over the gap between $3 million and $7 million. Not over weight, not over belts, over the structure of a check. But the money was only half of it, because underneath the purse fight was a deeper, uglier battle, the one over who controlled Vergil Ortiz himself. In boxing, a fighter doesn't just sign for a single bout. He signs to a promoter, often for years, for many fights, with that promoter controlling when he fights, who he fights, and what he gets paid. It's a system closer to an old Hollywood studio contract than to free agency. And Ortiz had decided he no longer wanted to be owned. Ortiz wanted out. He sued his own promoter, the boxing legend Oscar De La Hoya and Golden Boy Promotions, trying to break free from his contract so he could sign with Matchroom and chase the Ennis fight on his own terms. In other words, the fighter was suing the company that owned his career just to get to the starting line. And the company fought back hard. Golden Boy was granted a temporary restraining order against Ortiz, a court order limiting his ability to even negotiate with other promoters. The fight that fans wanted was now tangled in emergency motions and courtroom filings, the dispute with De La Hoya escalating week after week. This is the part of boxing the broadcast never shows you. A championship fight can die not in the ring, but in a judge's chambers. And every week the Ortiz fight stayed trapped in litigation was another week Ennis sat ready, in shape, with a date on the calendar and a payday waiting and absolutely no one to hit. So step back and look at what's happened. The most dangerous fighter in the sport moved up to find a marquee opponent. That opponent's side turned down $3 million, and then that opponent got locked in a legal cage by his own promoter. Ennis, the man nobody wanted to fight, suddenly had no one to fight. He had everything: the titles, the skill, the date, and no opponent. And the date itself was worth a fortune because of a quiet revolution happening behind the scenes. This card is the first major co-promotion between Matchroom and Top Rank, two companies that for years were bitter rivals. They can work together now because boxing's whole business has reorganized onto one streaming platform, DAZN. 4 of the 5 largest promotions in the sport, Matchroom, Top Rank, Golden Boy, Queensberry, now live under the same roof, alongside the Saudi-backed Riyadh season cards. So an empty main event slot on a landmark co-promotion on the platform the whole industry is consolidating onto was not just an opening, it was one of the most valuable empty chairs in sports. And it wasn't a thin card built around a single fight either. The undercard stacks rising names: Ben Whitaker, Emiliano Vargas, Jahi Tucker, the kind of lineup that only comes together when 2 major promoters pool their rosters. The whole night was built to be enormous. It just needed someone willing to headline it across the ring from Boots Ennis. And that empty space, that vacuum where Vergil Ortiz was supposed to be, is the whole reason this fight exists. Promoters now had a date, a venue, a broadcast slot, and a star. Everything except the one thing that turns all of that into a fight: a second name on the poster. And in boxing, an open date with a drawing card is money sitting on the table. It does not stay empty for long, someone was going to step into it. A few names came up. Josh Kelly, a title holder at super welterweight, was floated as one option, but the name that mattered was a young man who didn't need to take this fight at all: Xander Zayas. And to understand why that's so striking, you have to understand who Zayas is. Born in Puerto Rico, he made history at just 16 years old as the youngest fighter ever to sign a professional contract with Top Rank. Then, at 22 years and 330 days, he beat Jorge Garcia at Madison Square Garden to become the youngest active world champion in all of boxing, joining Puerto Rican legends like Miguel Cotto and Wilfred Benitez as a junior middleweight world champion. He is the unbeaten, unified WBA and WBO champion. The prize prospect Top Rank had been carefully building for 6 years. He had everything to lose. And Zayas raised his hand. He said yes to the fight that Vergil Ortiz's $3 million standoff had left wide open. And he didn't stumble into it. By every account, Zayas pushed for this fight. A 22-year-old unified champion, with a perfect record and a promoter who had protected him for 6 years, looked at the most dangerous man in the sport and demanded the date a $7 million holdout had left empty. Think about the chess move here. Ortiz held out for more money and more certainty and ended up in court, on the sidelines, watching. Zayas stepped into the spotlight Ortiz vacated and instantly became the man sharing the ring with the most avoided fighter alive. One fighter protected his value and lost his moment, another took the risk and seized it. That is the entire business of boxing in a single sentence, and it happened before either man in this Saturday's fight even finished training camp. And don't mistake Zayas for someone who simply rolled over on the money either. At the final press conference, Ennis claimed Zayas had pushed back on the terms too, declining a proposed 55-45 split that favored the winner. Even the man who took the fight negotiated hard. In this sport, everyone fights over the percentages. That negotiation is the real never-ending bout, and it goes on long after the cameras leave. And here's the twist that makes it even sharper. Zayas' own promoter, the 94-year-old Bob Arum, the man who has guided his career since his very first professional fight, openly admitted this is the most dangerous, most complicated assignment of Zayas' 6-year career. Arum said he'd have preferred an easier road for him, but he called the fight a win-win, returned to his birthplace of Brooklyn to stage it and let his young champion fly, because Zayas pushed for it. And for a promoter who has spent half a century shielding his prospects from exactly this kind of risk, simply stepping aside and letting Zayas take it was its own quiet statement. So that's how a fight is really made. Not by courage alone, but by a rejected $3 million offer, a lawsuit, a restraining order, and a young champion willing to walk through the door, all of that left open. Vergil Ortiz wanted $7 million and his freedom, and got a courtroom. Ennis wanted the biggest name available, and got a hungry young champion instead. And Zayas wanted the spotlight badly enough to risk a perfect record for it. 3 men, 3 bets, and only one of them walks to the ring on Saturday. On June 27th, at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, live on pay-per-view, Xander Zayas and Jaron Ennis will finally trade punches. But the real fight, the one over money and control, was already over before the opening bell. This channel breaks down the money behind the sport, fight by fight. Subscribe, because next we open the wallet on this one. That pay-per-view costs $74.99. We're gonna show you exactly who gets paid from your money and who doesn't. $3 million turned down, one open date, and a 22-year-old who said yes. In boxing, the fight is decided long before the bell.